Welcome again. This is part of our youth leadership webinar series. Our webinar today is called Understanding and Exploring Youth Peer Support Frameworks, and it is the second part. Um, we had the first part of this webinar series last week, and the recording of that is available. So if you didn't get to see it, we do have the recording on our website. And we will be sending that out along with the recording of today's webinar. This webinar was developed in part under grant number SM082648 from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This webinar will be recorded. The recording will be posted to the National Empowerment website at power2u.org. And closed captioning is available. You can click on the CC or more to view closed captioning. You can also view the entire transcript of the meeting by clicking on Show Transcript. And at the end of the webinar, there will be a Q&A session. You're invited to ask questions at any time through the chat function, and we'll do our best to answer all questions. If we don't answer your question, you're welcome to email us at info4@power2u.org, and we'll do our best to get back to you. And you're also welcome to make comments using the chat function. Um, So that's it for the housekeeping slide. So I will now turn it over to our panelists. Thank you all so much for being here and really looking forward to this webinar.
Us too. Hi, everyone. Happy October 8th. Last time we saw most of you was October 1st. So I hope your October is going well. If we could just take a moment and ask everyone, if you feel comfortable, just go ahead and put your name in your Zoom boxes. And then also, if you can do a quick tech check, we will be utilizing the reaction buttons on the bottom of your Zoom bar, emojis, chat box, mute, unmute. So if you want to just take a moment and make sure all that's working, and even send some emojis now if you want. There we go. Love it. All right. Well, we are so excited to have you all here with us again, or if you're joining for the first time, welcome with our special two-session series, Understanding and Exploring Youth Peer Support Framework. This is session 2, so if you missed session 1, there was a recording, so hopefully you can go back and watch that. But if you're with us and you're back again, let's go. Here we go. It's been a pleasure also to work with my team that I brought 2 new faces along. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment, but also working with the National Empowerment Center to be able to just put together 2 sessions that were virtual, easily accessible around things that were fundamental when it pertains to youth peer support and sharing your personal stories effectively so that we can continue building the workforce and continue to inform and influence future audiences for organizational policies and programming in the youth peer support ecosystem. So welcome again. I wanted to make a note that we referenced a couple Youth Move National specific resources last week, such as the strategic sharing worksheet. And it was also requested that we share out our slides. So what I did was connect with Shira, and after today's session, I'm going to send over a copy of both session decks because there's a couple slides I have to pull out, but you will get those as well as a strategic sharing worksheet and a couple more surprise resources that we're going to share today. So you're going to get all of that after today's session. My name is TJ McGrath. My pronouns are he and him. I'm in Long Beach, California. I'm the assistant director here at Youth Move National. Been here 4 years. And I wanted to just give a moment to my 2 co-facilitators today to introduce themselves before we dive into the content. So I'll pass it to Shane.
Thank you, TJ. Hello, everyone. My name is Shane McDonald. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I am broadcasting to y'all from Massachusetts, and I am a youth program coordinator with Youth Move National. I think I've been on the team around 4-ish years now. And I've been involved with youth advocacy and youth serving systems change making efforts for the past 7-ish years now. And I always like to say too that I'm a person of my own many lived and living experiences and identities. And I am just so grateful to be in shared space anytime I get to speak to youth peer support. So grateful to be here with all of you today and passing it to you today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shane. Thank you, TJ. Yo, I'm so happy to be here. I missed the first one, but I'm excited to be here. And we know that Huck is here with us as well, but his voice is struggling a bit, feeling a little under the weather, but is here and is going to be hanging out in the chat. So hello, folks. My name is Ark Telos Saint Amor. It is a very long name, so most folks call me Tay, but actually any combination of my name feels good and honoring to me. When folks refer to me, they usually say, "Oh, Ark, yeah, they are the executive director of Youth Move National." And they would be correct. I am the executive director of Youth Move National. And if you don't know, that MOVE stands for Motivating Others Through Voices of Experience, right? And we know that that is a big part of peer support, right? And so I'm really excited to talk about it. Similar to what Shane shared, I am a person of many multitudes and complexities, including co-occurring serious mental illness, and I'm on my own substance use journey. I was a system impacted youth as well as a system impacted adult, and I have lots of lived and living experience to pull from. Sometimes it feels like too much, but I'm excited to share space with y'all. And yeah, let's get going. Back over to you, TJ.
Thank y'all. And if you notice, I'm trying to halt you all from putting your intros because we're going to do a quick chat box activity with your intro. So just hold on just for 2 more minutes. Huck, we can go to the next slide. As a brief overview of what we've been and will be continuing to cover in both sessions, here's a handy dandy chart for you all. But if we could just focus on today's session 2, we're going to be going over some more fundamental elements of youth peer support, such as trauma-informed principles. We're going to talk about best care, self-care practices, the 8 dimensions of wellness, one of my favorite things, and then even some youth peer support certification guidelines that you all actually had some questions around last week. We will also have some time for you to reflect on your turning point stories that we ended with last week. And don't worry if you weren't here, it's all good. Don't worry. Okay, so before we get started with our formal content for the day, let's go into our connection before content, which is just a little bit more robust of an icebreaker. So we did this last week, but we're going to do it again because you can change up a couple of the different criteria here. So we're going to weave in an activity that I think we all enjoyed last week called Common Ground. And if you all participated in last week's session, we're going to just do this again. So just try choosing a new Common Ground selection, but still engage with emojis with individuals that you find resonate with you. So for the newer folk, or as a refresher to returning folk, if you all can share your name, location, if you choose to share it, a feeling word using that colorful wheel right there, and then something that you share common ground with. And if you can relate to what was shared by a person in the chat box, just react with a certain emoji of your choice in the chat. So I'm going to kick it off. So to warm it up, there's mine. My name is TJ. I'm in Long Beach, California. Today I'm feeling content, and I share common ground with people who enjoy the Halloween season. And then out of the other 50 of you, if you find common ground with me, go ahead and react with emoji. You can do it on your screen or in the actual chat box. All right, have at it. This was fun last week, so I'm going to try to say hi to everyone and see how many states we represent. That's my favorite part. Welcome, Veronica. Wonder if there's any Scorpios in the room. Yadira, also from LA. Hello. Ashley's from Virginia. Melissa from Illinois. We love plants here. Okay, this is harder than I thought, scrolling as fast. Hey Jeremy, we got New York in the house, Kentucky. Susan from West Virginia likes yoga. Savannah, I think you were here last time. Welcome back. I love crab rangoons. Yes. Libras. Oh, it is your season. I'll give you a couple more weeks to celebrate. Um, Stephen from Virginia. Lots of Virginia today in New York. Mark from California. Hello. Oh, Oryx, I didn't know you were in Massachusetts. Brianna, you were here last week. Welcome back. Caitlin, Janora from Bakersfield, also California. Lots of California representation today. Brandy from Portland. I hope everything's okay. Um, George also from Bloomington. We have another TJ. Hi. Kentucky. All right. 10 more seconds. Michelle from Wisconsin. Welcome. Scorpio. Awesome. Yeah. Are we all feeling grounded with each other and open-minded? I feel like we're in a safe space now. Like-minded individuals, passion for youth peer support, mission aligned, feeling grateful. Love it. Okay. I hope that was fun. All righty, y'all. Let's get into it. We're actually going to start with some turning point story reflections. So last week, most of you all got to hear my turning point story. And then we got to watch a video from Sarah, I believe her name is, who did a TED Talk on her personal journey. Remember, she wanted to join the Ringling Circus, but then became a nonprofit organizational leader. But she was sharing her story to a large TED Talk audience. And then we ended session one with reflecting on and writing our own turning point stories. So as a refresher, turning point stories are story of a time when you were faced with a decision, right? A turning point that impacted your future self. Also remember that turning points should not be the deepest, darkest, most traumatic stories or moments of your lives. They should not be your entire story of lived experience. They should be a single experience that was kind of that fork in the road moment, an experience in which there was a moment where you could choose to go one way or another, and that decision you made change your life for the better. It should also be able to be shared in under 5 minutes. I know a lot of us in this field are extroverts and like to express in a lot of words, but you got to trim it down, keeping it between 2 and 3 minutes. And then, of course, having a clear beginning, middle, and end. Now that you all have hopefully had some time to dwell on these over the last week, I just want to give you a moment to think on two more things. I'm going to put these in the chat. What didn't you write or reflect on that you might want to add to your story now? And then what did you write or reflect on that you might not want to share going forward? Thinking back to my story and Sarah's story. We're just reflecting. And if you have your turning point stories, do me a favor and keep those fresh on your mind as we venture into these next objectives and facilitators, because I think that the more we learn and discuss today, the more essential it will be that strategic sharing stays a critical part of our work and roles in order to inspire up and coming youth and those that we serve currently. So keep those close on the side or on your mind. All right. I'm going to now pass it to Tay for trauma-informed principles. And then I'll see y'all in a little bit.
Thank you so much, TJ. I am so excited about this, y'all. And we are going to keep this light and quick because, I am definitely, as I just shared in the chat, I'm a rambler. So when TJ talks about folks struggling to keep things under 5 minutes, I am definitely one of those folks, especially around trauma-informed principles, right? Because trauma-informed is such a buzzword. It's such a buzz phrase that gets thrown around so much in our field and in our day-to-day lives, at least mine, at least. I'll use an I statement. And I feel like often it's done with very little intention for what it truly means, or at least what it should mean in practice, right? When we're doing something trauma informed, it's a verb, it's an action. Like you actually have to do something, right? You can't just say, oh, I'm trauma informed, and then that's it, and then go about your day. That's actually not being trauma informed. So I am going to do my best to give this topic justice for y'all. But it's just going to be a very brief overview. So if we could go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the core components about trauma-informed care. If you can perceive your screen, it says recognizes widespread impact on trauma on youth, emphasizes safety and trust, and shifts the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And I don't like any of those key points. So we are going to redo this in real time with all of you and do some wordsmithing. But first, if you have your chat open, this is not a rhetorical question. This is a real question. Pardon me, I have a cold, so I got all these cough drops. If I got a paper cut right now, would y'all define that as trauma? Yes or no? Let me know in the chat. I get a paper cut right now. Okay, I'm seeing a no, another no. Karen, I see a baby. Ooh, we might be onto something new. It's not by TJ. Oh, come on, what am I doing? Y'all are experts. Y'all already got this. 1,000%, right? It all depends. Now, more than likely, right? Let's say I got a single paper cut. It hurt. It was disappointed. It was not the favorite part of my day, but I was able to go about my day normally and live my life as I typically do, right? Oftentimes, that's kind of just like a bad thing that happened to me, not necessarily trauma. Now, let's say I am prone to paper cuts and I cut myself on paper constantly. Always around paper. It's always cutting me. I don't know what's happening, but it happens continuously to a high degree over a period of time. That would more likely to then equal trauma to me. Or let's say I cut my finger on a piece of paper, right? I get a paper cut and, oh, it hurts. I'm running to the kitchen to try to get a Band-Aid and I trip and I fall and I knock over a table and all of the things break and a candle sets the house on fire and it's just an utter disaster, right? When I get a paper cut, my body may respond as if I'm right back into that traumatic moment because it set off a chain of events, right? And so there's a big difference between bad things that happen to us and trauma. But when we talk about trauma-informed care, a key principle is letting that person decide for themselves, right? And y'all were already in it on the chat. You already knew, right? So it all depends. To some, a paper cut might not be a big deal, but to others, it may be trauma. So that's a little bit about trauma. Let's break down informed. Do you need to know, again, not a rhetorical question, do you need to know that I have trauma around paper cuts in order to be trauma informed? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Bunch of no's, 1,000%. And this is my problem. We're going to reverse engineer this and start with the bottom key point. Shift focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Sometimes when we hear that word informed, right, we think, well, yeah, I need to be informed of what your specific trauma is so I can be careful. No, y'all, that's not how it works, right? When TJ was talking about our turning point stories, right, we were really careful about what we shared and what we didn't. We don't want to be personal with folks. We don't want to know confidential information. We don't want to activate someone's trauma response, right? So the informed is far less about knowing specifics and far more about just knowing that trauma exists in general. So it should inform the ways in which we create safer, more affirming, more welcoming spaces, right? And so, yes, there's nothing wrong with you. The vast majority of us have trauma. If you're alive right now, I would say you're probably incurring trauma every day, right? So trauma's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. Sometimes it is a natural response to very real things that are happening. But it's less about, hey, what happened to you specifically, and more about, I know trauma exists. So let me be very, very intentional about the ways in which I engage. Let me reflect upon my own actions so I can be a little bit better engaging with other folks. Let me be really intentional about setting safe and affirming practices, right? So if we go up to that next point, emphasizes safety and trust. Y'all, I'm sorry, I wish I could, but I cannot guarantee your safety. But what I can do is do intentional actions and practices to try to make a space more affirming and safer, right? It's that that we're trying to get to. That's the action. And trust. Oh my gosh, I'm already rambling and over my 5 minutes. If I had more time, I hope I'd be able to build trust with you. But often when we're working with folks or just getting to know folks, trust takes a long time, y'all. So it's really about doing things that are trusting actions, right? Leading and trying to build that trust through the actions that we do. And if we do that, if we do those things, hopefully we get to that top key point, right? That we're really recognizing widespread impact of trauma, especially on youth, right? Facing unprecedented major crises that no one has ever faced throughout human history, right? We can name about a billion things from climate change to wars and genocide and all of the things, right? And so it's about recognizing that trauma exists, having it inform our practices and the ways in which we engage with other. So that is what trauma-informed care is, at least that is an I statement. So if we go to the next slide, it breaks it down a little bit more specifically about what those sort of do's and don'ts are and what sort of being trauma-informed can really create. And often what it does is it creates hope. It's a way to offer hope and to uplift folks, right? And oftentimes, a lot of us don't often have that, right? Sometimes it can be hard to see the bright side in things. And I'm not a person that always thinks you need to, right? I don't think everyone always needs to see the bright side in everything. But hope can be such a beautiful thing if it's created naturally through building trusting relationships. It reduces stigma, right? Which is so important. So many of us feel isolated. We feel alone. We feel like that previous slide, like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I shouldn't talk about it, right? There's something inherently wrong with me. But the more we talk about these things, the more we do trauma-informed practices, we see that actually we're not alone and there's nothing wrong with you. And a lot of times us talking about it actually can solve a lot of the barriers that we may face. So it reduces stigma. And then lastly, it creates that authentic connection, which is at the heart of peer support, right? It's about folks with lived and living experience connecting with other folks with lived and living experience to create authentic, sustainable, trusting relationships. And that is authentic and that is holistic. So if we go to the next slide, I will wrap this up so TJ doesn't yell at me. So how can we apply this practically, right? So it's about doing those intentional things to create safer spaces, working intentionally to build trust, which really just involves active listening, being vulnerable yourself, holding space for folks, and offering insight and guidance while not speaking on behalf of others. It's promoting choice, right? Peer support is all about self-agency and self-determination, right? So you cannot take that away from folks, especially when it comes to things around bodily autonomy. Using empathy, right? 1,000%. We must use empathy. And then lastly, it's about recognizing those activators, right? Those trauma responses that come up that oftentimes we can't control, and having some safety practices, some guide rails in place to help navigate those things when it happens. and healthy boundaries, which is always so important, especially when we consider peer support as a workforce, right? When we're thinking about the things that it takes to really do it in a way that maintains self-care and healthy boundaries. Okay, so that is my time, I believe. Let's see if there's a next slide. I think I did the thing. I did. Thank y'all so much for listening. That was a bit of a ramble, but I appreciate y'all, and I hope it makes sense. We'll have time at the end to do question and answers. So high level view of trauma-informed practices.
Thank you, Tay. I appreciate you. And I'm just taking the virtual mic for now, but I did want to share just before moving on, if it's helpful. I often use the term trauma conscious or like trauma consciousness in sort of addition to trauma informed care and practice, because that's still like the mainstream used term, right, that folks tend to know. But that to me gets at the, it's this lens, it's this active ongoing awareness. It's not if I study enough things and consume enough knowledge, I will hold all of what it is to experience trauma for every and everyone, right? So I appreciate that too. And with that, we want to just move into this next objective around self-care and wellness in youth peer support. As we all, I'm sure, know and feel, right, this work can be incredibly meaningful and rewarding. It is. And it can also take a lot out of us, right? Supporting others while drawing from our own lived and living experiences can resurface emotions or memories we didn't expect. It can activate us, as Artella shared, right? And that's completely human and understandable in these lived experience-driven roles, right? So practicing self-care intentionally in this way helps us stay balanced and grounded. It prevents things that are common experience for folks in these roles, right? Like burnout and compassion fatigue, and gives us energy to continue doing this work in a way that feels sustainable for us, right? And there's a lot of for us in this self-care, because what self-care and wellness mean is absolutely individual to every person to an extent, right? Um, and in addition to, allowing us to stay grounded and present within ourselves and in the spaces we exist in, right? We're modeling for young people that caring for ourselves isn't selfish or overly indulgent, right? It's part of what allows us to keep showing up with compassion and presence, right? It's an act of self-preservation. And in a few, we'll spend a few minutes exploring what's called the 8 dimensions of wellness, which is one interpretation of how you can understand the different facets, or in this case, dimensions of how you understand your wellness. And together, all of these different facets or dimensions create this holistic, comprehensive, right, whole person view of what it means to be well. And again, I'll introduce that framework in just a moment, but just getting into self-care practices and the value in this work more broadly. There are so many benefits to intentional self-care, right? But we're going to focus on just 4 key ones today. Oh, and I love that note in the chat too. Yeah, self-care is an action of self-love. Self-love is the key. I love it. Um, so, as I already mentioned, right, self-care in this work helps prevent burnout. When we hold space for others, we also absorb a lot of emotional energy. We may be activated, right? Just socially drained. So taking the time to decompress from these times and spaces and connections is really, really important. And youth peer supports need time to recharge, right? Emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, what have you. We'll get into those 8 dimensions in a moment, right? After the often like intensive work of supporting others and returning to our own experiences, returning to and being in spaces and systems through which we may have experienced harm ourselves in our own lives, right? It's a lot. So regular self-care can restore that sense of balance for us and can reduce some of the stress that just inherently comes with this role. And second, self-care also enhances, ideally, the effectiveness of your role, right? When we care for ourselves, we show up more, again, grounded, present, focused, effective, right? It's that idea of sort of pouring into yourself before pouring into the wells of others, right? And third, uh, it's a great practice to model, right? To model self-care and wellness practices with youth we support, right? We can highlight how these practices have served us in our own journeys, right? While encouraging them to self-care as well, always as feels good and true to them with our support along the way, right? And finally, self-care supports our own healing and personal growth, right? Many of us are still moving through our own journeys of lived, and as I say, lived in living experiences, right? While supporting other folks. So giving ourselves permission to rest, recharge, reconnect to ourselves helps us stay connected to that greater why of why we're even doing this work, right? And allows us to show up with that authenticity in those spaces too. And for what it's worth, I know this isn't on this list, right? Just in a society who are often expected to just sort of, grind the grind, get it done, right? There isn't a whole lot of consideration for our right to self-care, right? So the main idea here is that you cannot, at least I would say, at least from my experience, sustainably pour from an empty cup or give from an empty well, right? The ideal is to give from that overflow, right? As much as is possible. So practicing self-care can kind of be an act of reclamation in a sense against some of those harmful narratives too. And it's also an essential part of any kind of like collective advocacy or change-making efforts. And if you want to learn more about that, you can look into Audre Lorde and the concept of radical self-care, which I definitely encourage you to do. But with all of that grounding and like sort of service level framing in mind, I want to get a little bit more specific with those 8 dimensions of wellness. So, folks may be familiar with this framework or even this wheel here, right? But the 8 dimensions of wellness framework was created by a person named Dr. Peggy Swarbrick, who's also a person of lived experience, and it offers this again, this whole person view of what it means to be well, right? Each dimension represents one part of this, balanced and fulfilling self-care framework that you hold, right? And when one area is less served or poured into, right, it often affects the others too, like spokes on a bike wheel, right? So before we start moving into each of these dimensions, I do want to take a moment, as I sort of alluded to earlier, right? Just to be intentional about the word healthy and how we even understand and support folks around this idea of wellness, right? What health and wellness mean is absolutely unique to each and every person to an extent, right? Those definitions can only truly come from individuals themselves, maybe with support from trusted healthcare providers, of course, but ultimately, we are the experts of our own experience, right? So because of that, it's important that each of us has an opportunity to define what health and wellness mean to us personally, and to decide how we want to incorporate self-care practices that align with those definitions. And that's something that we need to ensure that we honor and support youth in this work around in the same sense, right? So, oh, I see some Audre Lorde recognition in the chat. I'm like, can't ignore that. I love that. Just giving some more history. Thank you so much. Um, I love it. So as we go through each of these dimensions of wellness, I invite you to reflect and think about the areas that you may be already nurturing, right? And give yourself credit for those. It is not easy to self-care across all these different dimensions, right? Under all of the things and through all the things we're going through. And also consider, right, those areas that you might want to bring more attention to or pour into a bit more, right? And as I shared, this is one framework or model of understanding those different facets uh, or areas of our wellness, right? There are many more too, and you may find others that work for you. But let's start here with emotional wellness on this wheel, right? Which centers on understanding and expressing your emotions in healthy ways. So being emotionally well, quote unquote, doesn't mean that you're happy all the time. Everything's perfect, right? It's really about, having that emotional like threshold for stress and just emotions in general, and learning and building relationships with those emotions to learn how to, cope and reconnect with yourself when things are difficult, right? So some practices in this dimension might include things like journaling, of course, maybe, going to therapy, but other things like creative outlets, right? Like art, creative expression, music, that may help you like process your emotions or form deeper connections with them, right? So that's just one example. And if folks have favorite like self-care practices or even like links to resources, tools, apps, things that have served them in their journeys, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. I'm all about resource sharing and folks offering their wisdom in spaces with me as much as I may offer to y'all. So please do. But moving on from emotional wellness, we have environmental wellness, right? which is about your surroundings. Environment, it doesn't mean just outside, right? It's the space that we have around us. So that's both the spaces that you live and work in, but also spaces that just affect your well-being. So this could mean in terms of self-care towards this dimension, things like just changing up the environments that you're in. I will say, as someone who works from home and is set up in the same place that they sleep, my work-life separation, it's a growth edge. But also, for me, literally just getting out of this physical room, getting out of my apartment building, it's just change of scenery. It makes a big difference for me, at least, right? So it could mean spending time outdoors, shifting your space around, keeping your space, clean and organized, or at least, set up and structured in a way that feels comfortable and conducive to you. Or just setting up an environment. I'm all about like the vibe setting, right? The aesthetics that feel calming and supportive, right? All of that could be considered under environmental wellness. And I see, balancing that, working half day at the office and uh, doing some rest at home. I think even hybrid work, right? I'm thinking, what is the word? It's like ergonomics, right? How to adapt and honor self-care through the work, right? I love it. Awesome. And then I see next we have intellectual wellness, right? And this is that idea of encouraging curiosity and that continuous learning. That whole idea of that lifelong learner sentiment is true. Like, I truly encourage you to continue learning, being curious, exploring new things. Always, 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 right? So you can nurture this dimension of your wellness by doing things like reading, exploring a new hobby, exploring a topic that fascinates you. For me, I like to rabbit hole, as I like to say, around topics and ideas, right? Or even like doing puzzles and creative challenges like brain teasers, quote unquote, can be helpful, right? But there's so many different things. I say I love learning new things. I'm always researching or looking up topics. I am grateful for the access to information as we do with technology for sure, and that I often go, search up things that I'm curious to learn the lore or the context around. I love it. Moving right along, I think we're on to the fourth of eight dimensions. So physical wellness is the next one, and that focuses on, taking care of your body and understanding its connection to all of these other dimensions, but also things, like your energy and your mood, right? So things like movement, nutrition, again, as it makes sense for you and your body, rest, and of course, hydration all contribute to this area, right? But there are so many things under each of these dimensions that could apply in terms of self-care towards them, right? Not even just the few examples that I'm naming. I love attending webinars too for that intellectual wellness. I am here for that. Then we have occupational wellness, right? And just by the term of it, right? Occupation. So this relates to finding meaning and satisfaction in the roles you hold, whether that's through paid work or volunteering or personal projects, right? It's about feeling that what you do matters and contributes to your sense of fulfillment, whatever that means to you, right? Um, and I appreciate you, Denise, in the chat. I have to do better in this category. I feel like as I'm going through this, I'm re-identifying the things that I need to jot down as my growth edge action items, but I love it. And yes, if you enjoy the work that you are doing, like and being paid for as your formal job, I'm here for that too. And it is definitely in service of feeling good in that excuse me, occupational wellness dimension, right? And we have just three more to go, friends. So next, I think, yeah, next is spiritual wellness. So for me, for a while, I assumed that spiritual automatically implied like religious affiliation, right? But as with all of these different dimensions, they are very broad. So ultimately, spiritual wellness is really about purpose and connection to something just greater than yourself, right? That may mean faith, it may mean religion for some, and for others, it may be found through things like connection with nature, um, individual or interpersonal reflection with folks, right? Or just practicing mindfulness, meditation, anything that brings a sense of inner peace and direction and brings you back to your why as that applies to your human experience. And I love connecting to Earth in the chat too. I definitely need to do that more. That's environmental too. And as you may start to kind of perceive through going through each of these, they intersect, right? So there are some practices that may serve one dimension and also flow some benefit into some other dimensions too, right? Awesome. All right, two more to go, friends. And next we have social wellness. So that centers on relationships and belonging. It's about, feeling connected, maintaining supportive, affirming relationships, and being parts of communities that feel affirming and uplifting for you. So this, in terms of self-care practices, could be as simple as calling a friend or loved one, attending a support group, or just scheduling time with people who make you feel affirmed and connected, right? Like filling up that social calendar. Uh, I appreciate you, Denise. I'm like, that's a plan on it. I love it. And then last one is financial wellness, right? So that involves understanding your finances and making choices that as best we can under our circumstances, right? Reduce stress and promote sustainability for ourselves, right? And that can include things like budgeting, financial planning for the future, finding small ways to build consistency in how you're able to manage money, right? Um, all of that could be sort of under this dimension of financial wellness. And with all of these, each of these dimensions, again, like intersect and support each other, and small steps or action taken to pour into one area can absolutely ripple out to strengthen the collective whole, right? I just did a whole hecking ton of talking. I do appreciate the engagement in the chat, though. And before I move on to our next objective, I just want to leave some space. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on self-care in this work or these 8 dimensions of wellness in this moment? I know Shira noted Q&A at the end, so if folks are saving the questions, it's great for me too. All right. And I hear on the student loans too. Oh my goodness. Okay. But for now, y'all, moving on just to our next objective. So as we move into this next section, we're going to explore 2 practices that really bring the heart of youth peer support to life, right? And those are concepts of appreciative inquiry and empathetic listening. So both of these approaches help us shift away from immediately trying to fix or solve whatever circumstances may be happening for a young person, right? To really creating space for discovery, imagination, mutual understanding, and collaboration and moving forward, right? They invite us to slow down, to notice when our own experiences, assumptions, biases are shaping what we perceive, and allows us to stay open and curious instead of absolutely certain that we know the right way, right? Or that our immediate perceptions are absolutely what is true, right? Uh, an appreciative inquiry helps us and the youth that we support connect with a sense of possibility, to dream into a future, and to identify what's strong and really like drawing them forward, right? What's working, and what could be. And empathetic listening helps us hold those dreams with care, right? Listening and holding space in ways that build trust, affirm self-agency, and honor the full human experience of whoever we're supporting, right? So together, these practices remind us that meaningful change doesn't start with, again, identifying what's broken, what's wrong, immediately going to, that problem solving, shift it mode, right? But it really starts by identifying and amplifying, what feels good and true and most important to youth individually, right? And where their hope is for the future and where they want to be and what they want to work towards, right? So getting into this a little bit, actually a lot of it. I think I'm gonna do a little reflective activity here. Oh, thank goodness, because I know I've been doing a lot of talking. I will do more, but now you'll have some more just an activity to be able to engage with this a little bit more. So here we're offering this tool, this 5 stages of appreciative inquiry, which is a practice that allows us to dream into our futures and can be supportive to youth in doing the same thing. And again, this is called appreciative inquiry and just giving credit where credit is due. This is a concept that was developed by David Cooperrider and his mentor, Suresh Srivastava, in the 1980s. And this tool or practice can be really helpful because imagination and the ability to dream a future can often be lost as a result of our lived experiences, our traumas, the barriers and circumstances that we've navigated across our lives, right? And if we can dream, we can ideally get better insight into planning for our future and even taking action to move towards our dreams and goals. So it's very common for folks who have experienced trauma across their lives or again have that lived or living experience to maybe hold a sense or belief that there is no expectation of a future. And given circumstances that folks may be in or under, that is so completely human and understandable too, right? And there have been many reports from youth who live in communities who have experienced ongoing harm, either from within the community itself, due to all kinds of social conditions, or externally from even systems, right? They maybe can't imagine their answer to, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? Because they can't even imagine growing up. I'm getting the goosebumps because I resonate, right? There have been many stories from youth who have had experiences in like mental health treatment facilities, especially those more like residential or like longer term settings, right? Who can't imagine their lives as free and independent people or adults, right? So appreciative inquiry really is a tool or practice that really allows us to move from that mechanical problem solving, fix it immediate mindset, right, to creating a maybe previously unimagined vision by really exploring the best in us and bringing that to the forefront. So we are going to give y'all an opportunity here to try out this practice for yourselves. And we encourage you to offer it to any youth that you support as feels helpful to them, right? To be able to support and moving towards their dreams and goals in that sense. An appreciative inquiry has 5 different stages that are displayed here on the slide, right? They are define, discover, dream, design, and destiny. And each stage has its own reflective practice. So folks may have some like space for notes and things that they have open and ready already. But if not, moving on to this next slide, Huck, if you're willing and able, and as you feel comfortable, if you want to take a blank note page, piece of paper, or if you want to do digitally, a blank like notes document, and just take a moment to do whatever feels good and true to you to allow yourself to sink into this next activity. This is going to be an opportunity for each of you to spend time individually reflecting and responding to the questions that I offer y'all as we guide you through each step or stage of this activity. And we won't ask you to share your responses out with a group. This is truly just for you. So as feels good and comfy to you to participate in this, please do. And we're going to give you around 3 minutes with some tunage or music, if Huck has it set up, for each of these different stages or steps of appreciative inquiry to jot down your responses. And then we'll come back together and just do a little debriefing. So with that, if folks are feeling like they have some space in front of them. If not, that's okay. If you want to reflect on this just internally, that is also totally okay. But we're going to give you 3 minutes to start with this first stage, which is define. So with this, the questions that we have are starting with, what top 3 things do you value most? May not be the 3 only things, right? But thinking 3 of the top things that you value the most. And then I invite you to pick one of those 3 that you would like more of in your life. And if you'd like to explore that a little bit further in your reflections, why do you want that? And what may need to happen to get more of that thing or value in your life? I'm going to pause, give you all that 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, friends, if you were keeping time with us, we did reduce into just 2.5 minutes just to be mindful of the time that we're at and what we have left to cover. And if you didn't fully note down all of your thoughts that you wanted to for this stage, and if this is true for you across this activity, that's okay. I encourage you and invite you to return to this over time, and just as feels helpful to you. But for now, we're moving on to our second step or stage here, right? And that is discover. So, as sort of continued thread from that first define, right? This is what has worked really well for you in the past. So, more specifically, if you could describe a time when you felt strong, powerful, right, clear, sure, certain, right? When maybe you wanted something to happen and you made it happen. What emotions do you remember? And anything else that you want to recount or note in terms of what you remember best about that time in your life or in that situation? So, I'll leave you with that. Some more music, and we'll move on to the next stage in 2.5 minutes, friends. All right, friends. Moving on to our next stage here, which is dream. So, if you want to get a little more creative and do some drawing in addition to writing, you're absolutely welcome to do so. But I invite you to imagine what it will or may be like when you achieve what you've chosen to work on. So again, that through thread, right? If you'd like to, you can draw what you would see or imagine with that achievement, right? Draw the ideal. And you can add some words to your visual images. And if you're not into the drawing piece of this, you can absolutely describe it in words as well, but just giving y'all a chance to sort of envision or imagine what that ultimate outcome would be for you. Thanks, y'all. All right, y'all. We have two more. And then if it's helpful, just for a foreknote, we are going to offer just a brief break after we're done with this activity for you to get just a moment to decompress, reconnect before we close out. But in the meantime, let's move on to this next stage, which is design, right? So thinking about how do you get there, right? How do you get to that ultimate goal, right? So uh, reflecting on this in this moment, what are the steps that you need to make your dream a reality, right? And in that, consider who or even what, right, might help you along the way. Maybe one more stage after this, y'all. Your friends, in one more stage here, which is sorry, okay. Like building anticipation, destiny. So this is all around sustaining that dream once you're there, right? So what will sustain and keep it alive, right? How will you keep your momentum going, right? That continuous moving forward. And what will you need to do to continue to do that? Giving you another 3 minutes, and then we'll close out, friends. Right, friends. Again, no worries at all if you're still completing your notes on this stage, or maybe you haven't had a chance to fully complete through this entire practice. But I do hope that it was helpful to have an opportunity to explore just a little bit in shared space today. And before moving on, we did want to offer just a brief 5-minute break for folks to do any bio breaking that they need to, refresh their beverages, whatever you need. Um, and then we will return at 10 after the hour. So I'll put that in the chat as well. Thanks, friends. Ah, CJ already got me. Amazing. I will share too. If you want to mute and go off camera, that's totally fine. And I trust if you leave the space entirely that someone will let you in from the waiting room. So either way is okay. And we will return shortly. Thanks, y'all. All right, friends, if you can hear my voice, I am inviting you back into this shared space to continue through our session together. Uh, I'm sure there was a very quick 5 minutes, um, but I hope it was helpful to y'all. And I'm just going to give it until we roll over into like the next minute for folks to be able to take a moment to gravitate back into this space. All right. So from here, I know that we just took some time independently reflecting across this activity, and I promise uh, you still will not be asked to share specifically what you noted across your experience of this activity. We just wanted to chat it out and discuss it a little bit more broadly, right? So folks can absolutely feel free to share their sentiments in the chat across each and every one of these, right? But just starting with this first question, through this activity, how did it feel to use your imagination in this way? Sort of getting out was this helpful to you? Could you imagine returning to this as a practice? Oh, no worries, Maria. I appreciate you. I know for me, sometimes it's a helpful practice just to be able to unpack things into smaller pieces and like visualize things in this like smaller step and bigger picture way that this practice really encapsulates. I love that. No change without imagination. I appreciate that sentiment. I love it. And folks can absolutely feel free to continue sharing thoughts around this first question, but I will, just for the sake of time, offer the next. So, how might you imagine using this practice with youth or offering it as a support to youth in your work? Ah, I do have a definitely going to use this from Ashley. I appreciate it. And hey, if you just want to share that this is helpful to you, or I mean, if it wasn't helpful to you, please do let us know. And otherwise, I will offer this third question here, which is what are some other ways that youth could maybe illustrate the dream stage, or you could illustrate that dream stage? And again, as a reminder, that was that, imagine what it will be like when you're on the other side of achieving that goal or dream that you've chosen to work on, right? Like, what is that envisioned, imagined ideal, right? So, aha, I love it. Denise, I see vision board. Yep. So things like vision boards, collages. I've been doing that a lot personally just because I love to craft and it's blending together for me with some self-care and healing work. I love that. And I appreciate you, Savannah, too, for uh, noting that this was helpful and that you'll use it as well. I see creative self-expression, I think, around that dream stage as well. I love it. Awesome, friends. Ooh, scrapbooking, 100%. Awesome. All right. I encourage folks to absolutely feel free to continue sharing their thoughts and feelings in the chat as we move along. And just for my last portion of today, I'm going to bring us through this idea of engaged and empathetic listening, which is one of the most powerful ways that we can support real affirming connections with youth that we're supporting, right? It's about being fully present as best as we can, right? Not just hearing words or just holding space for holding space is worth, right? But really tuning into what's being expressed in the words that we receive and what's beneath them, right? The context. It helps us communicate clearly, can help reduce misunderstanding, and can support building the kind of trust that really supports healing and growth. And our goal, ideally, in youth peer support isn't right to fix, of course, never to diagnose or to interpret meaning for someone else, right? It's really to understand, reflect, and stay with youth in whatever they're expressing or experiencing, right? And these tools or practices on this slide, right? Pause, listen, repeat, paraphrase, of course, the empathetic listening, validation and self-disclosure, and oh, I'm sorry for the beeping. Okay. Open and close any questions. Help us practice this kind of presence and intentional holding of space, right? So just real quick, right? Pausing, or what we call engaged silence, is one of the simplest yet most powerful tools we have. I definitely could practice it a bit more. Silence gives space for, thoughts and emotions to settle, to process, right? Both for us and for the youth that we may be working with, right? So instead of just, filling the air because we're maybe nervous or unsure or uncomfortable with silence, I know that's me, we can take a breath, right? And allow the moment to breathe. And this kind of pause is an act of communication, and it communicates care, right? It can communicate the sentiment of, I'm here, I'm present, I'm not rushing you, and you matter enough for me to take a moment, right? To take a beat. Silence doesn't, take away from communication. It honors that and is a practice within it, right? And then we have listening, right? So both active and nonverbal. It's really about staying fully engaged with words, tone, body language, right? All of the ways in which that we communicate and listen, right? So much of communication happens without words, right? The pace of someone's speech, their posture, right? Body language, their facial expressions, even those pauses, right? Sometimes our words may communicate one thing, right? But our body language or tone may communicate another, right? So paying attention to these cues, ours and those of others, can help us stay attuned and responsive in the moment, right? And you can even notice how much shifts when someone practices certain types of body language, like crossing their arms, avoiding eye contact, nodding while listening. That all being said, depending on your context, your culture, different forms of body language and physical nonverbal expression may be considered listening and respectful listening, and some may not, right? So there's difference in that way as well. And then we have just this repeating back and paraphrasing, right? So repeating back what someone has said as close to their words as possible is a way to show that we're really listening, right? And for many people, being accurately reflected like this is rare, right? It can be really powerful. It can help for folks to feel truly, deeply heard and held, right? So saying something like, what I heard you say was this. Did I get that right? Did I miss anything? It's always helpful to make sure that you clarify that what you're repeating back is truly what you received as an initial message, right? And then paraphrasing is similar, it sort of builds on that by restating what was said in your own words while trying to keep that original meaning and not shift away from it, right? Um, and paraphrasing helps us confirm understanding in the same sense that repeating back can, while also showing that empathy and respect for their perspective and their lived truths and realities, right? And then getting into that idea of empathetic listening. That means being with someone instead of, again, trying to move into this, I need to do, shift, fix, solve, right? It lets people know that you understand. I'm sorry if you're still hearing beeping, y'all. That you can relate to their situation and that you're holding space with care. Most of the time, you may not be, seeking someone to immediately solve a problem or a circumstance right now, right? They're looking for connection and understanding. Empathetic listening really reminds folks that they're not alone, right? Which is that, part of that trauma conscious intention as well, right? So sharing sentiments like, that seems like it was really, really difficult for you, or I can totally understand why you would feel this way, right? These small acknowledgments can be really affirming. It can help to, cultivate that sense of safety and trust as well. So, so important. And then totally in line with your peer support, right? Is that validation and self-disclosure, right? It takes things a little bit further. So validation means reflecting back that someone's feelings make sense and are valid, even if their situation is complex or painful, right? And in peer support, we can sometimes use small, thoughtful moments of self-disclosure, right? Or strategic sharing that show that while we may have felt alone in our experiences, the person in shared space with us that we're supporting isn't alone now, right? So, for example, like I hear you, I see you, I feel you. When I went through something similar, I felt that way too, or this is what my experience was like, right? And that can support you through really feeling seen and held and supported without shifting focus away from them, right? That's strategy and strategic sharing too. And then finally, we have open and closed-ended questions, right? which can guide how we invite dialogue or continued conversation, right? So those closed-ended questions, like, are you this, that, or the other thing? Did you this, that, or the other thing? Usually lead to a short yes or no, right? And can unintentionally sort of keep conversations limited or, closed in, right? Whereas open-ended questions create space for more reflection and deeper sharing. So they may sound like, and these are very specific examples, right? But, what was it like when you first moved out of your parents' home, right? What are some things that you like to do when you're not in school? What do you want out of this specific, like, college or academic experience, right? So asking open-ended questions and giving that meaningful silence after them can allow folks to share what they want us to understand in their own words, right? And all of these tools work together to create conversations where youth, again, can feel truly affirmed, seen, held, supported, and ultimately in control of their own stories now and in their paths moving forward, right? So when we communicate with empathy and intention, we make space for connection, agency, and trust to truly grow and continue. And be remiss if we didn't also acknowledge that there are absolutely roadblocks in communication that happen. It's a part of being human, right? So we call these, in a sense, communication roadblocks, right? These are patterns or responses that can unintentionally shut someone down, right? Or make it harder for them to share what they're truly hoping to. They often show up when maybe one or both people in the conversation are under stress, right? Real. And instead of helping, they can create distance or defensiveness. And when these roadblocks appear, they can create all sorts of negative outcomes for folks, right? They can lead to lower self-esteem, feeling unheard or unaffirmed, right? Lead to withdrawal or disconnection from us in our peer support relationships, right? Even feelings of resentment or just greater resistance to continuing to connect with you, right? So over time, this can cause us to miss what's really being communicated and drift away from what the young person actually needs for and by them, right? So as we move through this next piece, which gets into these roadblocks a little bit more specifically, we'll just acknowledge what some of these roadblocks can like sound like in real life conversations in service of hopefully recognizing them for ourselves and shifting away from them or addressing them as best we can to try to keep connections thriving, right? So there are 12 roadblocks that we have to share with y'all in terms of roadblocks to communication, right? And there are countless others, I'm sure. But we have these for now. And many of us use some of these without realizing it, right? Totally a part of being human, especially when we're under pressure or just trying to help, right? Our intentions may be good, but the message the other person receives can be really different. So sometimes it can come off as blame or judgment, or like we don't believe that a young person can handle something on their own, right? So recognizing these patterns helps us shift towards more supportive, agency affirming responses, right? So some responses, as they're sort of like chunked out here, right, communicate this sense of non-acceptance or can take away from a young person's sense of autonomy or agency over their lives, right? So ordering, commanding, or directing, that whole, just figure it out, right? Not ideal. Then there's, of course, warning or threatening, right? Like, you better get it together, or this, that, or the other thing are going to happen for you, right? Like instilling that like fear, not okay, right? Um, and then, as we shared, right, not like assuming that our reality or what we believe is right and true is true for other folks, right? That sort of moralizing or preaching with those shoulds and oughts, right? You should definitely talk to your, psychiatrist about this medication, right? Like we don't do that, right? And then we have advising or offering solutions, right? Well, we can absolutely collaborate and support youth with moving towards their goals and dreams, right? We're not projecting our own goals and ideals onto youth and coercing them towards them, right? So, what you need to do is this, and, the best steps for you to take in service of your own wellness or this, that, and the other thing, right? That's not for us to decide. Uh, no shoulding. I love that. And then we have teaching or lecturing, right? So for example, if you want to get to this goal, then you'd better do this, that, or the other thing. Like just getting on a pedestal and then talking at a person, and sort of like assigning them the work on how to move forward rather than actually holding space and collaborating and understanding what feels good and true to that young person, and how they want to move forward, right? And then we have other responses that communicate unfairness or that fault finding, right? So judging, criticizing, disagreeing, or blaming, name calling, stereotyping, labeling, and sort of like leaving out the sentiments here, right? Because these I think are pretty straightforward, right? But overly interpreting, analyzing, or of course diagnosing, right? We're not trying to like make meaning or define a person's experience in our own words, right? Rather than listening to and understanding their own, right? And then I know we have a few more. So some of these other responses try to make someone feel better, right? Which can come from a very well-intentioned place, but can ultimately minimize or dismiss what a young person's sharing, right? So overly praising, agreeing, or even some of that like toxic positivity, right? Like you've been through so much, you can absolutely get through this. It's no biggie. You got this, right? There's a balance, right, between encouraging hope and supporting that while also not practicing that toxic positivity of, just get over it because you can and you're strong, right? You're resilient. And in addition, right, overly reassuring, over sympathizing, consoling, or supporting in a way that like avoids or shifts away from the situation that they're in, right? Like, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through this. At least you have this nice thing going on in your life. Or, hey, well, at least there's no clouds in the sky and it's nice out today, right? Like just trying to take away from really holding the emotional, rawness and intensity of what that young person's sharing, right? And these last two responses shift the focus away from the person's experience entirely, right? Or at least from uh, where they want to be in that conversation necessarily, right? So that's that moving into that fix it, solving, we got to do something mode, right? With questioning, probing, interrogating, why didn't you do this? What are we missing? What do you need to get done, right? And then things like withdrawing, distracting, joking, being sarcastic, again, that making light of things, or that, why are you so sad? Just put on a smile and move forward, right? All of these things are things that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we may have practiced in our own lives or have experienced from others, right? But all things that can be roadblocks to communication and therefore connection with youth in this work, and all things that we should seek to, I would say, personally and professionally, try to shift away from and recognize in ourselves, right? And then I'll be a little bit briefer in this next one, I promise. We just have some factors that affect our listening, right? There's so many different things that can influence how we're able to show up and hold space and process information, right? So, of course, all of the assumptions, biases, prejudices that we may have or others may have in coming into a space, right? The physical environment, right? If you're in a space that is super quiet versus super noisy with tons of people in it versus not very many, right? We have the listener's attention span, right? Your ability or threshold to be able to hold space and take in information, right? Um, that coming in with a stance of wanting to be right, or it has to be either this or that. That's sort of like black and white thinking, right? Rehearsing a response or overly rehearsing how you're going to show up in a space, right? Defensiveness. We acknowledge that daydreaming with the roadblocks, distraction, body language, all of these different pieces can influence how you communicate and how you take in information, right? So all things that are important to stay mindful of. Awesome. And if folks have questions on any of these pieces that we went over, I promise we'll get to questions in a moment. And I'm just going to give a quick little plug around formalized youth peer support pathways, because I imagine that folks may be interested, if they're not already aware, of what youth peer support certification, and even if you're in the roles, what youth peer support billing for the work could actually look like. So real briefly, and then I'll pass it back to you, Artelis. I appreciate you. And you can go right to this next slide, Huck. You're great. Awesome. Formal certification for youth peer support varies quite a bit by state, right? It is not all the same everywhere that it exists, and it doesn't exist everywhere. So each state determines its own process for things like core trainings, applying for your certification, and renewing or those like continued ed requirements. And right now, there isn't a like single national certification that transfers automatically between all states, but there is growing collaboration and momentum towards more shared standards and mutual learning across different state programs. And I do have just a few resources here if you want to dig a little bit deeper. At Youth International, we do have a youth peer support web page that offers an overview of our youth peer support efforts, offers some just resources as well, and then opportunities to continue connecting with us. There's also, if folks are familiar with it, the Copeland Center has this directory that's also a helpful resource that lists current certification details for at least adult peer support roles. I think it may have a line around family and youth. And I'm not entirely certain like how updated it is, but it is a resource that is out there. And then finally, Mental Health America does have a similar directory with more of an emphasis on training requirements and the state agencies that oversee peer certification. But again, depending on where you are, certification pathways may be a little bit different or may not be fully grounded where you are right now. And just on billing for this next slide, just like certification, billing can be different depending on where you are. In some states, youth peer support is a covered benefit under Medicaid or private insurance, and in others, programs rely more heavily on state or federal grant funding, such as block grants or like more like specific targeted initiatives. And many organizations also braid together, right, multiple funding sources to sustain peer roles longer term, right? And because funding structures vary so widely, sustainability is still one of the biggest challenges for this workforce where it exists, right? It's something we're all continuing to learn about and build together, right? So again, just a few resources on this slide. So I noted just the SAMHSA grant funding opportunities page, which lists current and upcoming federal opportunities that may include some peer-driven initiatives. There's a little example of a like grant proposal that is more like specifically relevant to youth peer support services. And then there's definitely, I think, maybe a bit outdated, but I do believe a lot of the information in this is still helpful. This youth peer support Medicaid guide, which overviews how states can include youth peer support within Medicaid plans and reimbursement structures. So, I think that's all for me. And this one, oh my goodness, I feel like I've been talking forever. But I appreciate y'all so much for having me. And for now, I'm going to pass it back to you, Tay, who will lead us into our final piece on co-reflection and youth peer support.
Thank you so much, Shane. And that was fantastic. I always love listening to you talk, and I hope y'all really enjoyed some of those activities and doing some of that reflection and diving a little bit deeper into what peer support means for us and appreciative inquiry and all of those fun things. So you only have to listen to us for a little bit longer, and then we are going to move into a big debrief and question and answer. So we only have maybe like 6, 7 minutes of some didactic, and the last 20 minutes, I promise you, is going to be fun and engaging. But in order to do that, I want to kind of explain what we're going to do together as a group, which is co-reflection. And so the sort of definition that we're offering up is co-reflection is a collaborative process where individuals reflect on their experiences, actions, and interactions, often in the context of a shared goal or activity. So, for example, oftentimes when we're running youth peer support programs, we bring in a bunch of youth peer supporters from different agencies, different place-based locations, different specialties, different expertise, different lived and living experiences, but they share something in common, right? Maybe they're all from the same state, right? And we bring them together into a space and we have them work together to just reflect, like, how is the work going? What barriers or challenges are you experiencing? What are some of the successes you have? What can we celebrate? What are some common themes that are coming up for your work, right? So it's a way in which individuals can reflect on their own experiences while listening to others, but around a sort of shared vision and goal. And the intent is to move the field forward, to move our own experiences forward, and to learn from each other, right? I often say the only thing I am an expert on is myself. That is literally it, right? But when we share our lived and living experiences with others, when we share, right, our expertise, oftentimes others, right, will be like, oh, right, I have that as well. Or that's so interesting because that makes me think of this. So doing that co-reflection space as a group together is a way to get really good and healthy dialogue, especially when you're able to do it in a trauma-informed way. So if we go to the next slide, we can sort of see some of the ways in which we can sort of set this up and the benefits of co-reflection. Collaboration, right? Very much so on theme with all of the things we've been talking about throughout this two-part series. Learning, learning is so important, y'all. And I would also often offer up what's maybe to me, I'll use an I statement, a little bit better than learning is what we do with it, right? Turning that learning, that knowledge into real growth, into real action, into real practice, right? And doing that together in a co-reflection space can be a great way to figure out how do we move learning into action, right? Effectiveness, right? It's the next key point. It can lead to more of these effective practices and positive outcomes. Personal growth, right? So much of ourselves are poured into this work, right? Oftentimes we're in this field because of our own experiences, because of our own passions, because of our own heart work, right? And so not only can you help grow yourself, but you can help grow others, right? And just exploring different perspectives, right? That the diversity of thought, that diversity of perspective is always so important, which is why doing self-reflection is super important for personal growth, but then doing co-reflection with others allows us to hear those different perspectives, think in different ways, and in some ways say, oh, wow, I resonate with that. And that makes me think of this. Or like, okay, totally valid. That's your experience, but it wasn't mine. Why is that? Right? So it's a way in which we can really reflect back and forth together as a group. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how we do this through, slide is not changing for me. There we go. So how can we do this? Set aside dedicated time. Now, yeah, I shared that I'm the executive director of Youth Move National. And so I bring that up because firsthand, I can tell you that this is work, right? Oftentimes, if we're in the workforce, if we're doing peer support as a job or as a role, we're getting paid to do that, right? And that money comes from someplace, right? And so oftentimes in my role, I'm trying to find that money, right? So I'm working with funders, working with grants, doing all of these different things. And I'm going to tell you, not very often do folks fund the important work of relationship building. Oftentimes, y'all, we're still under capitalism, right? Time is money, and that mentality, even in the nonprofit world, is really embedded in things. Oftentimes, folks don't see the value of setting aside time, dedicated time to reflect both on your personal growth and with others. But it is critical to your success. It is vital, right? This work is absolutely vital because it does a lot of those things we've talked about: collaboration, building empathy, building trust, right? Having dedicated time to do that is so critically important. And we can use, again, those trauma-informed principles, right, to create a safer place, right? So we're going to add the to the end of that. It's an opportunity to ask thoughtful questions, right? To listen actively. And that's another phrase that kind of gets thrown around a lot. So what it means to me, I'll use an I statement, to listen actively, is to truly not be thinking of the ways in which you want to respond when someone's speaking, is to truly not sort of be interrupting folks necessarily when they're talking, but to genuinely try to hold space for others, actively think on the things that they're saying, right? And then follow up with them, right? So if someone shares something like, oh, I went to the bank and I did X, Y, Z. Oh, cool. How did you get to the bank? Right. So asking sort of follow-up questions is a great way to actively listen, right? It's a way we sort of decenter ourselves and center others. Again, with a big old asterisk, right? That a lot of these sometimes are embedded with some very ableist, neurotypical behaviors, right? And so the only right way to actively listen to someone is the ways in which that person tells you it's going to feel good and honoring to them. And then lastly, which is the whole purpose of co-reflection space, is to focus on those shared goals and common causes. Okay, I think that was possibly my last slide. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, perfect. Okay, so we are going to practice